This is 5 Live Formula One with Jack Nichols.
Hello everybody, welcome to Imola, the fourth round of the 2022 Formula One World Championship. And we have free practice 2 coming up for you this morning, and then later on this afternoon, the first F1 sprint race of the season. Yesterday, we had qualifying in damp conditions, and Max Verstappen managed to take his first pole position of the year. Championship leader Charles Leclerc second on the grid, and then it is Lando Norris in third place on the grid, and that will be how they will line up for the sprint later on. A real difficult day for Mercedes. George Russell starting 11th, Lewis Hamilton down in 13th. And also a difficult day for the second drivers in the Red Bull and the Ferraris. Carlos Sainz crashed out in the second part of qualifying, and Sergio Perez didn't get a representative lap in the final part of qualifying either. So they are down in 10th on the grid for Carlos Sainz and 7th for Sergio Perez. So the good news for them is they have the sprint race later on today to try and gain some places up ahead of the full Grand Prix tomorrow. And there are also points up for grabs today. We'll get into all of that a little bit later. Alongside me today for commentary, we're delighted to have the Williams development driver and W Series champion Jamie Chadwick, as well as the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. Jamie, very different day today. Not a cloud in the sky, and a whole lot, I think, for the teams to learn.
Yeah, exactly. I think normally this free practice 2 session, when there's a sprint race, kind of doesn't really get you that excited because obviously they've had qualifying yesterday. But today, track conditions being dry, it'll be really interesting to see, where everyone fares, because I think there are a lot of people that are out of position in dry conditions. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this free practice session ahead of the sprint race later.
Yeah, Andrew, there's going to be a lot of information to learn. For our first real look at the competitive order this weekend.
Well, yes, except it's probably going to be a bit hidden because unlike in a normal, say, second practice session on a normal Grand Prix weekend without the sprint race, you would expect them to go through a setup program and then a qualifying simulation program and then a race simulation program. There's no point in them simulating low fuel qualifying in this session, so they won't. So they'll only do race type preparation. The question then is how much fuel do they have on board and what tyres have they got, and you can guarantee they won't all be doing the same thing at the same time. But I'll try and stay on top of it as best I can, and hopefully there'll be some helpful graphics as well.
And presumably they'll have no real concept of what tyres they even want to be on at this point, because usually when you get to a race run, you've probably, in an FP2, you've probably decided broadly what you want to do with your tyres over the weekend, but they've ran some softs in quali yesterday, that's it.
Yes, so they'll have a good idea of how the softs are behaving after qualifying yesterday. Of course, the temperature's very different today. It's 19 Celsius today rather than 12 Celsius as it was yesterday. But there's a pattern emerging this year. And generally, the soft tyre, whichever compound it is not a favoured race tyre. So I would expect most of the teams to spend most of their time in this session on the medium or the hard. The one thing to say about that, though, is that Ferrari only have one set of hards left, and they'll definitely want those for the race, so I suspect they won't use the hard in this session.
Well, Charles Leclerc leads the championship, 71 points at the top of the standings. Second is George Russell on 37. Carlos Sainz is third on 33. And Max Verstappen is down in 6th place, just 25 points for him from his win in Jeddah. And starting on pole for the sprint, it's a huge opportunity this weekend for Verstappen to get back into the fight.
Definitely. And yeah, of course, I think Ferrari are a bit out of place. They've shown they've had the pace, particularly in the wet, so it'll now be interesting to see where they're at in the dry. But regardless of that, I think track position is very important around here. The DRS effect is high, but I think track position after the sprint race, eagerness to win the race later today is going to be high for Verstappen. So it's a big opportunity to kind of claw some points back and get back into this championship.
Yeah, because points are available as well for the race. 8 for the win, 7 for second. So, okay, if he wins and Leclerc's second, he only chips away by 1 point. But long old season, and those points are going to matter. Just before we get going, we got a lovely email overnight from Trevor. And he says, I am from that place which has done very well being twinned with Imola. And thanks for the lovely comment, Andrew, about my town. But he did not know Colchester was twinned with Imola, or the gardens which are near the castle. And he's actually attached a photo of his wedding in 2003 in Imola Gardens. So Trevor got married in Imola Gardens, and he doesn't hate you too much for slagging off Colchester.
Phew.
Yeah, exactly. So hashtag BBC F1 if you want to get in touch over the course of the weekend, or F1 at bbc.co.uk. So And a reminder that we'll have this practice session. The sprint gets underway at 3:30, which you can hear on Radio 5 Sports Extra, and then here on the BBC Sport website and the Formula One app as well. And then the result of the sprint decides the grid for the race tomorrow. First car out on track is Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin through the left-right chicane at Tamburello, and then making his way down towards the Villeneuve chicane. He's gone straight out on the medium tyre, so getting underway straight away. Mick Schumacher leaves the pits, Zhou Guanyu leaves the pits now as well, and I think we're in for a very busy session, a lot of track action, that's for sure.
Definitely, they're going to be trying to get as many laps under their belts, as Andrew said. Race runs mainly, but still getting a better understanding for the tyres. The tyres seem to be the weird thing this year, mainly in qualifying, but even in the race, teams trying to understand the characteristics of the tyres and what the operating window is, and the best operating window in every compound seems to be the thing that, they're all struggling to understand.
There's a lot of work going on Valtteri Bottas's car. The car is up on the stands, the whole floor appears to be off, and there's some serious work going on the back of the car. So we'll try and get to the bottom of what's going on there, because most other drivers, I think, would have been heading straight out. Andrew?
It looks like Daniel Ricciardo's got similar problems as well. I can see that the Spanish journalist Albert Fabregas has tweeted that his engine was off the car, I should say, with 6 minutes to go to the start of the session. I've asked McLaren what's going on, but I'll let you know as soon as I find out.
Okay, well, out on track now is the Mercedes of George Russell, just coming down to Acqua Minerali at the bottom of the hill. Mercedes failing to reach Q3 for either car, which ended a 187 race streak that went back to the 2012 Japanese Grand Prix.
And just to update you on that Ricciardo situation, McLaren say they're investigating an issue on Daniel's car which will delay his start to FP2. They hope to resolve the issue and get the car out before the end of the session, so that's going to take some time, it sounds like.
And if you miss all of the dry running in this session, you're in a bit of trouble, aren't you?
Definitely. I think it's one of those things, it'll go unnoticed, but it's going to really set Ricciardo back for this weekend, particularly as, like you said, they've not had the dry running. Ricciardo's already a bit on the back foot behind Lando in qualifying, so frustrating for him.
Yeah, he's going to be 6th on the grid for the sprint later on. Norris 3rd on the grid. Ricciardo actually put in quite a decent lap at one point towards the end of the session, but Norris just pipped him. Kevin Magnussen 4th for the Haas. 5th will be Fernando Alonso. Ricciardo, Perez, Bottas, Vettel and Sainz the top 10. Then Russell, Schumacher, Hamilton, Zhou and Stroll the top 15. Tsunoda, Gasly, Latifi, Ocon and Albon the 20 drivers. That's how the grid's going to line up after Albon's failure yesterday. And Haas are in the top 4 on the grid for the first time in either the sprint or Grand Prix formats, the highest they've ever qualified.
Yes,
quite a lot of fifths in their history, I reckon.
Yes, the Grosjean and Magnussen partnership, when they were quite good through the 2017 and 2018 seasons, they were quite often around sort of 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th on the grid, weren't they? But Magnussen, it was interesting yesterday because he went off at the start of Q3 at Acqua Minerali, managed to get the car out of the gravel trap there and carry on, and then get 4th on the grid, which was quite an achievement. Just on McLaren, I think it's been interesting, the impression of McLaren is that they're having a really difficult year this year, which was kind of formed at the first race in Bahrain when they really were off the pace. Andreas Seidel, the team principal yesterday, was saying that he feels that what happened in Bahrain was a knock-on effect of them struggling in the test when they had front brake overheating problems, and the whole test was compromised, and he thinks that set them back, whereas all the other teams had the advantage of the knowledge of the test, which they then carried on into the race. And that was a disproportionate effect, if you like, on McLaren. And since then, with more time with the car, that's why he feels they've moved forward in the way that they have. They were sort of bottom end of the top 10 in Saudi, and then middle of the top 10 in Australia, and now 3rd with Lando Norris. Okay, it was a bit damp and cold, so that might have skewed the picture a bit. Obviously, they're still a long way off the Ferrari Red Bull battle with where they want to be, but I think it's more, this overall pattern is more reflective of where McLaren really are at the front of the midfield.
50, for those of you needing a sync up, we've got 55 minutes and 37, 36, 35, 34 seconds remaining on the clock. Charles Leclerc has just been past the huge banking on the outside of Tosa with all the Ferrari fans filling it and the flares lighting up the air around Imola as Leclerc now makes his way towards the Variante Alta at the top of the hill. He's on a set of medium tyres. It's fairly split at the moment. Zhou's gone out on mediums. Schumacher, Russell, Hamilton, Magnussen, Leclerc and Tsunoda on mediums. Lewis Hamilton just had a big drop in power. He is, as I say, out on the medium tyres. Stroll, Vettel, Norris, Perez and Verstappen all went out on the softs, but that is the sound of the fans cheering Charles Leclerc back into the pit lane after his install lap. It's great to see the passion that everyone's, they're all quite reinvigorated for Ferrari now, aren't they?
Definitely. It's races like this when it's so cool to see Ferrari back at the front. Obviously Monza, I remember it really well. I think it's 2019 when Leclerc won in front of the home crowd, and yeah, the passion the fans of the Italians is incredible. So yeah, amazing also to be back at Imola. Obviously we've been here for the last couple of years, but in my opinion such an underrated circuit. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's going to be good, and it's really cool now without that last chicane too. That long blast from Rivazza all the way down to the first corner at Tamburello has really helped the sort of overtaking and stuff, I think, as well, with 54 minutes on the clock. Norris is quickest at the moment. He's on a 1 minute 23.821, but only 2 drivers have set the lap time, he and Joe is a second further back. Stroll is improving on this lap, as is Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, but the lap times will continue to fall away. Ricciardo, Latifi, Ocon, Sainz and Bottas are all in the pits still. No news yet on what's gone on for Valtteri Bottas, but we'll keep an eye on that. Vettel now coming down to the bottom of the hill as Hamilton goes to the top of the times, a 1 minute 21.880, as he was out-qualified yesterday by George Russell. Will start 13th on the grid. I just can't imagine what it's like being Lewis Hamilton at the moment, because he stays in Formula One. He's got all these world championships, but knows that he's out of the championship fight now, isn't he?
Most likely, yes. I think it's uncharted territory for him. But this is where I'm hoping we see the world champion in him, and that's where, developing the team, obviously, George will feel a huge responsibility to get on top of the car as quick as possible, seeing his future at the team there. But yeah, I think the key is now getting on top of the car and making sure that they can turn it around. And like we saw with McLaren, obviously they had a tricky start to the season, but they've turned it around in obviously mixed conditions, but they've turned it around. And I think we need to see that from Mercedes now.
Yeah, he's been here before, but it's a long time ago. Jamie, I don't know how old you were in 2009, but but he was even worse in 2009, which he went into as the reigning world champion after his first title. But McLaren were one of the slowest cars on the grid at the start of that year. And I remember being told a story which sort of says a lot about Hamilton's competitive instincts. He'd had a terrible year. He was battling for 15th, 16th. I remember him and Fernando Alonso staging a fantastic battle, but over some ridiculous 16th place at Silverstone. They got to Hungary and they'd made a big upgrade on the car. He won the race, and the team were all just thrilled about winning the race. Hamilton turned to one of the team members and said, "How far am I behind? I can still win the championship, can't I?"
Does anything happen to Hamilton's legacy if he were to retire at the end of this year, Andrew? Is there a bit of a, I don't know, questions asked about him or anything on? Is he only gets it because of the best car, and all that'll sort of resurface a bit, right?
I hope not, because it'd be ridiculous if it did. If you're starting to say things like that about Lewis Hamilton now, you've not been paying attention over the last 15 years. He's unbelievable. And he'll do extraordinary things this year, I guarantee, in this car. I don't know what they are yet, but they will happen. It's just people who should just not say that. It's daft.
Sorry.
You were just...
I was just being devil's advocate.
Exactly.
No, I think it will. I think people will say that because that's what sports fans will naturally do. But I think, yeah, as Andrew said, what he's achieved in the last few years, year on year, is undoubtedly the greatest of all time, in my opinion. And for him not to get the 8th last year, he's going to be frustrated at the way things are this year. But, he still might be around next year, and we never know what's going to happen, for Lewis Hamilton going forwards.
He's just been a little bit balked by Zhou Guanyu coming into the Tamburello chicane. The Alfa Romeo not necessarily getting out of the way as quickly as he might have liked. Perez across the line to go quicker again, a 1 minute 20.198, and he is 6/10 ahead of his teammate Max Verstappen. They're 9/10 ahead of Pierre Gasly. Then it's 1.1 seconds back to Albon in 4th, Hamilton 5th, and then it is Tsunoda, Leclerc and Zhou, the rest of the top 8. Hamilton following Zhou as he comes down the hill. I think he's going to be starting ahead of Joe on the grid tomorrow, isn't he? I think Hamilton will be, today. Hamilton will be 13th and Joe 14th. So they'll be right together as he comes up to the top of the hill now at the Variante Alta. Taking a lot of curb through there and a bit of a slide on the exit, and then makes his way back down the hill towards the Ravazzas. Sonoda now goes third quickest on the medium tyre. He on the mediums, Pierre Gasly on the softs. And Sonoda did out-qualify Gasly yesterday, which was a reasonable performance, but a very disappointing performance for AlphaTauri overall. Both of them out in the first part of qualifying, despite it being their local track, just 20 minutes or so down the road in Faenza. Bottas doesn't look ready to go at all. He's got a jacket on and a cap on and his mask on, watching the screens.
And I wonder if that's a hangover from yesterday's issues in Q3, when obviously we saw him pull over. And I don't recall what the issue was, but I wonder if there's something that, when starting up this morning, hasn't been fully resolved.
Yeah, because of course there's the curfew involved as well, so it's not as though the teams can just work overnight and fix whatever the problem was. They might have run out of time after qualifying yesterday, so it's a good shout as Bottas pulled off on the exit of the Variante Alta at the top of the hill. Sonoda now dropping down in the white and blue AlphaTauri through the two Ravazzas at the end of the lap. He is improving on this lap at the moment. He's 1.5 seconds back from Sergio Perez. He finds 0.4 of a second to go 1.1 seconds back from Sergio Perez. No action yet, as we've mentioned, for Valtteri Bottas, also as we mentioned for Daniel Ricciardo. And the same is true of Ocon and Sainz. Those two have not left the pit lane yet. Leclerc has now done 6 laps. Verstappen has done 6 laps too. In fact, as I say that, Carlos Sainz leaves the pit lane on a set of soft tyres, joins the track, and I'm interested to see what Sainz can do today and what attitude Sainz will take, because he's starting a bit further back in the pack, and when he had that in Melbourne last weekend or 2 weekends ago, it didn't quite go according to plan.
No, but he's got an opportunity here. He's got what I would say is the fastest car on the grid at the moment, and the sprint race to get himself back into an opportunity to score well tomorrow. So I think he needs to start today fresh, gather as much data in this session, and then obviously in the sprint race try and claw back as many positions to have a good chance for tomorrow.
Chris Thomas says Imola is known for being hard to overtake. How has the junior category races fared this weekend in terms of overtaking, and can we expect much action with Sainz and Mercedes being so far back? We touched on a little bit earlier. There has been a Formula 3 race today. There
has, and the DRS effect seems to be pretty strong. The long straight down into turn 2 is definitely a spot where drivers will be quite vulnerable if they're in the DRS train. But what we saw in F3 is this DRS train. So if everyone's got DRS, then it also makes it equally hard to overtake. So I think the sprint race will be interesting because I'm sure it'll be more bunched than we're expecting. But at the same time, it's not the easiest track after turn 2 to overtake at.
That is Jamie Chadwick, the Williams development driver, alongside Andrew Benson and myself, Jack Nicholls, with you for second practice ahead of the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. And just confirmation from the team, it is a rebuild after yesterday's issue for Valtteri Bottas, so that is why he is still in the pits as well. Just getting a replay of Lewis Hamilton coming up to the Variante Alta, and sent it in a bit hot.
He did. He committed early to not try and make that corner. He started a lock-up, and no point in flat spotting the tyres anymore, more than they need to be at this stage of the session.
Straight over the grass in the runoff area, and Verstappen has had a bit of a slide and actually crunched the curbs on the exit of Acqua Minerale quite heavily on his way up the hill. He did similar in qualifying yesterday and asked the team to just check the floor. He hit them a little bit harder. SJ says, how are they working on the cars? I thought they were in Parc Fermé. Well, you can still make repairs to the cars, so that's not too much of an issue on that front. If the car is broken, you're allowed to fix it. And also, it doesn't really matter for actually, he did make it towards the end of the session, didn't he? So he will, if they can repair it without breaking any parts or getting any penalties, then he can start where he qualified. Standing here now is Fernando Alonso, coming down the hill, who had one of the most iconic fights here back in the day with Michael Schumacher at the end of the Grand Prix in Was it 5 or 6, Benson?
5.
5, okay. You didn't seem fully confident in that, but yeah, 2005, right at the end of the Grand Prix.
It's hard to. Michael actually won in 2006. That's how I remember. But
okay.
the one thing that's hard to remember about that stat is that it's kind of weird to think of Schumacher contesting for a win in 2005 because they were uncompetitive for most of that year. It's just for some reason, some kind of magic of chemistry and tyres and everything. The Bridgestone tyres on the Ferrari worked well at Imola that weekend in a way they didn't really work pretty much anywhere else.
It's a bit of a niche story. I haven't really, but I now work in Formula E. I work with some of the people who did the TV production back then and did that famous advert break with 1 lap to go, and I don't let them forget it, actually. So also the same people who cut for the advert break and missed Hill overtaking Schumacher in Hungary in '97. So yeah, I never let them forget it. 44 minutes on the clock now, and Perez is quickest, Verstappen is second, Albon is third quickest on the softs in the Williams. He obviously has got a bit of, well, actually he went out in Q1 yesterday when the rear right brake caught fire, but I mean, in reality, he probably didn't miss out on much running, considering he may well have been out in Q1 anyway. But nevertheless, a really strong performance from Albon last week, 2 weeks ago in Melbourne to score points from the back of the field.
Exactly, and I think we touched on it before. Definitely not where the car is in terms of performance, P10. But even still, it would have been interesting to see what Alex would have been capable of yesterday. We saw with Nicola Latifi, he was theoretically the slowest car, with Ocon having his issues. So I think realistically they probably would have been out in Q1. But even still, it'd be interesting to see how their dry run pace, and I think they've nicknamed Alex the tyre whisperer. So if that can come into play at all this weekend, it'd be good to see. Yeah,
exactly. He managed to keep that hard set of tyres going for basically the whole Grand Prix in Melbourne. Hamilton is 100th down on Perez in the first sector, which is just after the first 2 chicanes. Now he's climbing the hill to the highest point on the track, then down a little into the left-hander of Piratella, down even further into the double right-hander of Acqua Minerale. Named after this whole track is in the park, Acqua Minerale. And then climbing up the hill the other side towards the Variante Alta. Just looks a very uncomfortable ride in that Mercedes when it's just bumping all the time, bouncing all the time with the porpoising. Hamilton is actually up on Sergio Perez after the middle sector. He's now dropping down. Perez is 7/10 ahead of Verstappen. Again, these are quite unrepresentative lap times that we're getting. Through the final corner comes Hamilton out across the line, and he sets a 1 minute 20 in the end, 0.023, 2/10 slower than Sergio Perez. The quickest Q1 time we had yesterday, which was on broadly a dry track, was Charles Leclerc on a 1 minute 18.7. So that was the quickest lap time we've had this weekend on, low fuel, but much lower track conditions, and we're running a second off that at the moment. What are you making of these lap times so far, Andrew?
Well, I was just thinking it's hard to understand what's going on, because normally a race start lap time is 6, 7, 8 seconds off a qualifying time.
Yeah.
And only 3 seconds that is fuel. The rest of it is tyre management, basically. And Leclerc is obviously in one of the quickest, either the quickest car or the very first equal car, and he's lapping in an average of on the medium tyre of 1 minute 22 seconds at the moment, which is a bit too fast to be simulating a first stint race time, you would think, unless the tyres are being able to tolerate more pushing than normal.
Well, but the only reference we have is an 18.7, which is a damp track in 11 degrees air temperature.
And qualifying last year was about a 1:14, I think.
So maybe that is the first stint time, whereas Verstappen is also on the mediums, but he's lapping in 1 minute 20.9, which is a second quicker than Leclerc. So that can't be representative fuel, as you wouldn't have thought.
No, those two feel a bit incomparable, don't they? Because it'll be much quicker if you're doing a sprint race run, then you're going to be going considerably quicker than that, because you're only going to have 1/3 of the fuel of your rivals. So yeah, interesting. Perez is improving again on this lap on the soft tyre. He's on his 12th lap now on this soft tyre, Sergio Perez, with 40 minutes on the clock, and he is just coming down to the 2 Ravazzas at the bottom of the hill. The double left, and we'll see whether he manages to improve. Perez quickest at the moment, Hamilton second, Verstappen third, Tsunoda fourth, Albon fifth, Gasly, Russell, Sainz, Leclerc, Latifi the top 10, Vettel, Alonso, Zhou, Stroll and Magnussen the top 15, and then Schumacher and Ocon the 17 drivers. Norris has done a 1 lap and that's all. He's done an out lap, a fairly slow lap, and then an in lap, and that's it. So no major running for Lando Norris so far, as well as Daniel Ricciardo not doing any running. So that's not ideal, whatever's going on at McLaren. We'll try and get to the bottom of that as well, with 39 minutes on the clock. Perez quickest, Hamilton second, Verstappen third, Tsunoda fourth, Albon fifth. Carlos Sainz coming down into the 2 Ravazzas, and he said as he goes through the corner where he crashed yesterday, he said he wasn't even really pushing when he crashed. He said he wasn't really on the limit. He was taking it fairly steady. They were safely through to Q3, and was very surprised to find himself in the wall.
It looked like a weird one, to be honest. That said, I think these cars now are tricky to drive, and at the limit, they can be unpredictable. So, yeah, I think it's just another mistake that's going to knock his confidence, especially if he didn't know why it happened. Then as a racing driver, it's the worst thing, because you don't know what the cause of it is. You can't then make any changes to stop it from happening in the future. So, yeah, he's on a lap now. I think their dry pace should give him some more confidence, and I think it'd be interesting to see how he fares in the session now.
I think what's important for Sainz today is he needs to make up some ground in the sprint race, clearly, but he needs to have a steady, trouble-free race. He can't afford to have another day where he makes a mistake like he did in the Grand Prix in Australia, and then again on the first competitive day's action after that, having spent Thursday talking about the fact that he didn't understand why he'd not reacted well to the pressure in Australia. There's now more pressure on him, and he has to get it right today.
Steve is listening from, I don't know how to, Strathalbyn in South Australia on the F1 app after a day volunteering at Gilbert's Motor Museum. Have you been to Gilbert's Motor Museum in South Australia, Andrew?
I've not been to South Australia.
Oh, really?
No.
Well, hang on, what class is South Australia then?
The state South Australia.
Oh, really? Oh, I see.
Where Adelaide is.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, point taken. Because, I would have classed Melbourne as being pretty South Australia.
Ironically, it's more south than South Australia, but it's Victoria.
Okay, well, anyway, Steve has been volunteering at the Motor Museum, and they have the Lotus 12 driven by Graham Hill in 1958, his first F1 drive, and Lotus's first foray into F1 in the museum. And the museum's patron is Glenn Dix, who waved the flag at the Australian Grand Prix held in Adelaide in the 80s and 90s.
And very flamboyantly too, if people remember, yeah.
At 87 years old, he still carries a flag in his car in case he's called upon.
Unlikely, you would thought.
I don't disagree, but yeah. Thank you for tuning in, Steve. Appreciate that, and great voluntary work. It's brake issues for Lando Norris, so he's come back into the pits investigating a brake issue, and they hope to get him back out. So that's difficult for Norris and Ricciardo to not be getting this running in.
Yeah, we just saw Ricciardo sat in the garage with also Bottas sat on the pit wall, and both of them don't look convincing that they're going to be getting out anytime soon, which, yeah, a bit of a nightmare for both McLarens.
One more observation about the lap times at the moment. Looking a bit further down the field, if Leclerc is simulating a first stint at a Grand Prix in the sort of low 22s, then Fernando Alonso could be doing the same in the Alpine. He's lapping only a couple of tenths off Leclerc, actually, and the Alpine did look pretty competitive in Australia, and obviously he's fifth on the grid this afternoon. So that could be another sign of Alpine, being decently competitive this year.
Apparently, Stu says Schumacher and Alonso had a good fight in 06 as well at Imola. I don't really remember. Do you agree? Can't remember?
I can't remember either.
Okay.
Sometimes they all blend into one, the Grand Prix. You've seen so many.
Exactly. 35 minutes on the clock. Lance Stroll coming through the first sector in the Aston Martin, and then climbing up the hill. 15th on the grid later, Lance Stroll. Sebastian Vettel did well, actually, to get into the final part of qualifying, because he's had a tough season so far with lots of issues and quite a few accidents, but Q3 and ninth on the grid was solid.
I mean, he's only had one race, and that was probably one of the worst events he's ever had in his career, I'd imagine. But I think Lance will feel hard done by yesterday, because he always goes well in mixed conditions. When it's wet, drying conditions. Remember at Monza a few years back, he qualified on the front row of the grid, and he was set yesterday to have another strong result. I think he was caught out with a red flag, and that allowed Sebastian to obviously jump ahead and get into Q3 instead of him. But I think what it showed is the Aston does have some pace, particularly in those mixed conditions. I'm not so sure about how it's going to fare in these dry conditions today, but yeah, it's a nice positive step for the team.
Yeah, front row of the grid in must have been 17 or 18, I think, and then a pole position in the mixed conditions in Turkey in 2020. I think it was 17 for Stroll on the front row, but 34 minutes to go. He's currently 12th quickest for whatever it's worth. The tyre-wise, it's a lot of soft running for Verstappen and the Mercedes, but Leclerc has been out on the mediums quite a lot. Sainz has just left the pits on softs. Was he on mediums before that, Andrew, or do you not recall? I'll have a look if you don't recall.
I think he came out on the softs.
Okay, so he's been running on the softs the whole time, and Leclerc's been going on the mediums the whole time. Joe now splits the Ferraris by slotting into 9th position. Sound you can hear is Esteban Ocon's Alpine coming into Tamburello through the left and the right, then the little left kink that ended up being quite a challenge yesterday.
So on Leclerc, Jack, he's...
Jack, I enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Yes, Jack Lafitte. He's, I don't know how many laps. I've counted 13, which is, there may be a couple more in there as well, because it's hard to stay across everybody. He started off in the mid-22s and then dropped very quickly to the high 21s.
This was who, sorry?
Charles Leclerc.
Yeah.
He's still lapping 15 laps later in the low 22s on this set of mediums. So that's looking like a really consistent, stable race tyre.
Yeah, he's done, you're right, 15 laps on this set. Sainz has been on the softs the whole time, as you say, and then Verstappen has been out on the softs the whole time, as has Sergio Perez. Perez has done 17 laps now on this soft tyre. Best Jacques to race in Formula One? Is it Lafitte?
You'd have to say Villeneuve on achievement, wouldn't you?
So you think Jacques Villeneuve?
It's a difficult question. Is Jacques Villeneuve better than Jacques Lafitte? What do the audience think?
Is that it? Let us know.
Let's have their answers.
Hashtag BBC F1. Are there any
Gilles
others?
Villeneuve was definitely better than Jacques Lafitte.
Right, but crucially he wasn't called Jacques. What other Jacques we've had 2 Jacques Villeneuve race in Formula 1, right?
Did the first one actually race? I can't remember.
I think he did. He at least tried to qualify. Gilles' brother.
Yeah, he certainly tried to qualify in Canada a couple of years. It definitely failed one of those years.
Going to jump in as George Russell's gone 3 tenths quicker than Perez.
Thank you for being professional there, George. Wander down the avenues of history irrelevantly.
It was 3 did not qualifies for Jacques Senior. Canada, Caesar's Palace, and then Canada the next year. So Russell, a 1 minute 19.457 on the soft tyres, 3 tenths quicker than Sergio Perez, as Jamie said. Hamilton 3rd and back in the pits at the moment. And that lap for Russell was on a new set of soft tyres. So probably a set that did qualifying yesterday, because he's only done 2 laps on them, but they're 5 laps old. So that would be a new set of tyres for George Russell. And we are 30 minutes and 49, 48, 47 seconds into the session, and now I imagine we'll see drivers come in and switch over. Tsunoda and Gasly have both been out on the hard tyres in the AlphaTauris, but they're the only two have done so far. And of course you're doing your preparation running for the race, but also for the sprint, and so you're not going to be starting the sprint on a hard tyre.
Exactly, but it's interesting looking at the sectors, although George comes in the pits now, so that looked like a 1-lap effort, which probably isn't as representative as what some of the others are doing.
Something happened with the brake pedal into turn 2. Yep, we see that. It's still long now. Happened again.
Yeah,
The second to last corner. Cool.
Lando, we're going to box this lap.
So that was Norris talking about that brake issues that he had much earlier on in the session, the pedal going long into Tambirello. Do continue.
No, just looking at the sectors, the Mercedes looks to be pretty handy in the middle sector, which is where you'd anticipate there to be the least issues with the porpoising that they're having. However, that does mean their straight line speed in Sector 1 and Sector 3, I think, is their biggest limitation still. So in terms of the race, for them having to come through the pack from 13th and 15th or wherever they are, I think it's going to be pretty tricky for them given their lack of straight line performance.
Yeah, absolutely. 29 and a half minutes to go. Still Ricciardo and Bottas in the pits and not getting any running in at all. Joe now coming up towards the left-right at the... and actually Joe was an unlucky driver yesterday because he'd been very impressive in the first part of qualifying, fourth quickest, I think, and quicker than Bottas, but then with the rain affected and the red flags in the second session, he didn't get a lap in.
Yeah, exactly. He was one of those that got caught out, but showed some really impressive pace in Q1, and I think he's someone that's just going to improve and improve as long as he has this ever-growing confidence that he seems to have in the car. I think having a teammate like Valtteri Bottas is perfect for him as reference, and it's great to see that Alpha coming on so strong now.
28 and a half minutes to go. Verstappen is now on an outlap, so he has now gone onto the medium tyres, Max Verstappen, so we'll see what kind of lap times he produces and whether they're a direct comparison to Leclerc, who is 10th fastest at the moment and the only one of the front runners to have been out on the medium tyres so far. And I guess by front runners it's Leclerc and Verstappen, so but it is worth taking Sainz and Perez's actions into account, and they've all been on the soft tyres too. Tony says, are there points for the sprint? Do they need to change tyres? Do they get a winner's medal? There are points for the sprint. The winner gets 8 points. They don't, and then 7 points for second place and 6 points for third place, etc. They don't change tyres. It's just a one-stint race. And I can't remember if they get a winner's medal. Do they? What's the prize they get?
Well, last year they got to be called the pole position winner, didn't they? Which they don't get this year.
But last year the qualifying person still got the little tyre.
They got a medal. I think
Is it a medal?
you're right. When is that reminded me of something? I do remember seeing a medal or something a bit different.
When they're laurel wreaths at one
yes,
point.
you're right. The
That's
first
it.
one was a wreath.
Yeah.
That's the one.
I don't know if they...
The thing is, we don't know because it hasn't happened yet. I mean, we could have asked the question.
So join us in
done
4 hours' time when we'll find out what the winner gets.
If you care enough, I can message Formula One and find out.
Tony seems to really care.
Okay, but what about the rest of the audience? This is, valuable time.
No, all our audience are equal.
Of course, but I'm talking about sort of democracy here. What would the general audience feel about the need to answer that question?
If we have 4 tweets saying we want to know what the winner gets, hashtag BBCF1, then Andrew Benson messages Formula One and we find out what they get. Okay, that's the deal. That's democracy. This is democracy in action.
I'm quite
on the
interested,
BBC.
to be honest.
Okay.
I'd quite like to know.
That's enough for me.
Yeah, is it?
I'm going to
There
go
you
for
go.
that, yeah.
Okay, well, you've got to tweet in for it to count. That's the issue. Jago says, expanding beyond pure Jacks, Jackie Stewart is surely the best Jack. It's Jackie Stewart or Jack Brabham. I think those are the two choices. And I'm not qualified enough to make a determination on whether Jackie Stewart or Jack Brabham is the better driver. Has there ever been a racing driver called Andrew in F1?
Andy.
It's not a very racing driver name, is it? It's
not a very good name.
Is
but
Andy
very
Wallace
much.
being in F1?
Oh, Andy Wallace.
He was not in F1. He was an
not?
extremely good sports car driver, though.
Did he win? He won British F3, didn't he?
Yes, I think so.
And maybe raced in F3000?
Yes, not that successfully, though.
But never made it to Formula One. That's a good shout, though.
There's been Andreas in Formula One, which counts, doesn't it?
Okay, okay. You're channeling your inner Andrea de Cesaris.
Well, what better weekend to do it than this weekend?
Absolutely. Kirk would like to know what silly prize they get. So we got one.
Jamie's already won it. I've already sent
you're
a
already
message.
doing it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, fine.
Daniel Ricciardo's still in the pits, which, well, it's frustrating for him, but also for Lando Norris, who's also in the pits and doesn't look like he's getting out. Imagine starting third on the grid this afternoon, having not really done a dry lap of this track in this car. It's going to be hard.
Yeah, it certainly is. George wants to know. WRJ Patterson wants to know. Jane wants to know. I think we've got it. Yeah. Nulla Pack says almost zero interest in what the winner of the sideshow gets, which is fair.
And I have an answer already.
Do you actually?
I do.
Okay. What does the winner get?
They get sprint medals like the last two events in 2021.
Oh, so it's the same.
Yeah.
Ah.
Medals.
Have you won any medals?
Not since school.
What did you win a medal for in school?
Didn't you get a medal for W Series?
I don't think so.
What about when you won the F3 race?
No trophies.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not asking. Has Jamie
anything?
won any awards? Have you ever won anything?
No, I just wondered what you got for winning the W Series apart from the honour. You know, do you get a thing?
Yeah, but no, if you're winning a championship, you're getting a trophy, right?
Yeah. I'd like to, yeah. I mean, if I won a championship and they gave me a medal, I'd be a bit.
What did you win a medal for in school?
Honestly, I can't, like, very insignificant things, but I remember at home, my parents moved house, boring story, but I had to, like, basically sort everything out.
Yeah.
And I had this whole collection of random medals that, yeah, really was so insignificant, of, like, 100 metres swimming, came sixth. Everyone gets a medal.
Yeah, I found a certificate, actually, that in the 2003-04 football season for Bristol Wanderers, it was like, this is to certify that Jack Nicholls scored 1 goal. I didn't need a certificate. And also, it was like a, copy and paste thing. So they hadn't taken the S off goals because they expected people to score more. So it said 1 goals, which is even more embarrassing. I remember it, though.
Good goal.
I was actually. Ball bounced to me on the edge of the box, left-footed, bottom corner. I'm right-footed.
Lovely.
Right, 22 minutes and 40 seconds to go. Andrew, have you won any medals? We've got to finish this off.
I won some swimming medals when I was at school, yeah.
What for?
Swimming.
Oh, I'm not bothering with you anymore. 22 and a half minutes on the clock. Russell and Hamilton have done the second most laps in this session. 20 for Russell, 21 for Hamilton. Vettel and Stroll are the only ones who've done more on 22 and 23. So a lot of running there. Verstappen on a lap at the moment. His previous lap was his personal best, actually, a 1 minute 20.371. And we'll see what lap time this is as he comes down through the bottom two left-handers at Ravazza and then out across the line. And Verstappen does a 1 minute 20.6. So what do we think about that, Andrew?
Well, he's lapping 2 seconds quicker on his medium tyres than Charles Leclerc was. So maybe this is the sprint race simulation that he's doing. That would be my guess. You know, with a third of the amount of fuel in it compared to a Grand Prix.
Yeah.
I also think it's a bit unusual that George Russell was the only one to go out and do that sort of one push lap quali-esque style.
Well, they might be doing an experiment. Do you remember you were saying on Thursday about how they've been struggling with getting tyre temperature in the podcast? Well, Andrew Shovlin, the trackside performance director of Mercedes, was saying the same thing yesterday afternoon, that all year they've been struggling to get the first lap out of the soft tyre.
Yeah.
They tend to have to go sort of 1 lap, cool down, another lap, push lap, then another cool down, then another push lap, and the second and the third push laps are quicker than the first one. So maybe it was an experiment to try to work something out, because they really suffered for that yesterday, because they only got 1 push lap on the soft. That's why they're 11th and 13th rather than 5th and 6th, which is where you'd expect them to be.
Very good point.
Yeah, very interesting. Russell back out on track on those soft tyres. Verstappen doing another lap now on the mediums, and he does another 1 minute 20.6. So within 3 tenths, well, within a couple of tenths really, of his best lap time at the start of that medium run. I'm just trying to remember what we saw in the sprint, because we've seen drivers do 13, 14, 15 laps on the soft tyres, and depends how aggressive you want to go with the sprints, isn't it? Because the first sprint, Fernando Alonso went on the softs and really gained places at Silverstone, but then we do tend to see it settle into kind of everybody broadly does the same thing.
Well, it's interesting, I think, that Perez has done that stint on the softs. It was about 15 laps, as you say, and it was a reasonably consistent stint. You know, he was doing mid-20s pretty much all the way through, dipping into the 19s. He's got to make up ground in the sprint. I wouldn't be surprised if Red Bull were thinking, what's going to happen to the soft tyre over a sprint length distance? Can we risk putting Perez on the soft, get him to make some places up at the start and hold on for the rest of the race, exactly like Alonso did in Silverstone? The difference, of course, with Perez is that the Alpine last year was very much a midfield car, and he really was hanging on for the last half of the sprint, whereas Perez has, you know, the probably equal or just about, you know, it's one of the two quickest cars on the grid. If he can make up 2 or 3 places off the line, he's going to be 4th already. He might easily make up another. He could finish the sprint 3rd behind Verstappen and Leclerc, or Leclerc and Verstappen. And then that's exactly what Red Bull want for Perez to be in for the Grand Prix, because they want 2 cars against 1 for the main Grand Prix. That's my theory.
No, I like it. I like it. So apparently there was a racing driver called Andrew Gilbert Scott. Do you remember him?
Also not a Formula 1 driver. I do remember him,
not a Formula 1 driver, but a couple of years with he did drive a Jordan Grand Prix Formula 1 car down the hangar straight of Silverstone in a drag race for Top Gear.
Okay, he sort of did quite well in Japan in the sort of Japanese Formula 3000 series.
Correct, second in 1994. And then won the Japanese Touring Car Championship in 1993.
Yeah, he was one of the many European drivers who couldn't quite. There was a period through the sort of late 80s and early 90s where a number of people couldn't make it to Formula 1 who would look pretty decent, and they all went to Japan, got well-paying drives, and made a decent career out of it. Some of them, like Eddie Irvine and Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Mika Salo, came back to Europe having proved themselves in Japan and then got a Formula 1 career after all anyway. Others, like Andrew Gilbert Scott and Anthony Reid, who came back to do touring cars in Britain, never quite made it up to Formula 1, but made very good careers for themselves by doing that.
Jago says there is one F1 driver in history who only had one name. And I don't know who that's referring to. My guess, maybe Birra, but not technically.
He didn't have one name, did he?
No, but he was known as
Prince Birra, yeah.
But he was just known as Birra.
Yeah.
So maybe you're talking about him, Jago, but we don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. SJ says Andrew deserves a medal for working with you lot.
There's also Williams, of course, William Grover Williams, who was known as Williams in the 20s.
That's pre-war, though, wasn't it? Yeah. Tom says, would it not be better if Parc Fermé was closed from the sprint race? Opens a technical angle for qualifying on the Friday. Any thoughts on that, anybody? Not really. If instead of Parc Fermé beginning at the start of qualifying, because now everyone's just running around here in Parc Fermé, conditions can't change.
There's a very good reason why they haven't done that is to stop them making qualifying cars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, to save money, basically. I mean, obviously the budget cap also saves the money, so maybe you could argue.
And if it was only for 3 races, you wouldn't make a qualifying car for 3 races, would you?
Probably not, but you know, they wanted to guard against it. Basically, it's all part of ensuring that, a bit like the engine controls only 3 engines per year. It's about making sure. And people got to remember that back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, people were using 1 engine per session.
Yeah,
you know, it was just insane, and no one wants to go back to that.
But you'd also still see this session be just race simulations, because they would then have to set the car up for the race. I don't think it would change this session, to be honest.
Apparently Andrew Gilbert Scott was also Takuma Sato's manager for a while.
He
says
was,
Stugy. Scott Speed's middle name?
Come on.
Andrew. Yeah, we'll move on now. 15 and a half minutes to go. Leclerc's just gone second quickest in the Ferrari, a 1 minute 19.740, 2 tenths slower than George Russell. And that was on a new set of soft tyres. So he's done a 17-lap run on the mediums, Charles Leclerc. And now on his first lap on the softs, he's done a 19.7, which is 0.05 quicker than Sergio Perez has managed. Hamilton 4th, Alonso 5th. In fact, Alonso's just improved to do a 1 minute 20.1 on the soft tyres. So I wonder if Leclerc is now... Do we think that is a sprint simulation on a soft tyre?
He might be trying it. He's done a 19.7 followed by a 19.9. Let's see. That's actually quicker, quite considerably quicker than Perez went on his softs. But of course, you've got to take into account that it's later in the session. There'll be more rubber down. The track will be quicker. So you can't compare. That's not like for like completely. But he's got the same question in his head, Ferrari that is, about their sprint race. He wants to start the Grand Prix from pole. So he wants to hit some radio.
You can let us know how the tyres are.
Rears overheating a bit.
Hamilton's saying the rears are overheating a bit. He's on the soft tyres, 14 laps in.
So he's doing a sprint simulation there as well.
On the soft tyre. So they're all thinking, can we do the soft tyre, make some ground at the start, hang on the tyres. Hamilton's got lap times have gone out to 21.1 on his last lap after 15 laps. Let's see how Leclerc gets on. But just back to Ferrari, if they can get Leclerc ahead of Verstappen at the start, he'll probably win the sprint race. Whoever gets the first corner first, I would have thought out of those two is going to win. And then pole position for the Grand Prix, you know, you've got 7 metres advantage, haven't you? And you're going to take it.
So can Red Bull afford to start Verstappen on the mediums?
It's a good question. I think so, because I think the pace advantage, I would imagine, for Verstappen and Leclerc starting at the front is greater than the Norris's, who's not even started the race, started the session, and the guys closely behind him. So I think they've got a nice little buffer to have a little bit of freedom on tyre choice. However...
But if it all comes down to that run to the first corner, basically that decides pole position.
Potentially. It's so hard to predict with the sprint race. We've seen so many times where it just hasn't necessarily turned into something we thought it was going to turn into, and it does happen on the first lap. So yeah, I would prioritise the early laps, if it was me, but at the same time, I think if they can't get the soft tyre to last, as well as they're seemingly getting the medium tyre to last, which we see Perez, I think, is doing another simulation now, that will be the factor.
Are you a gambler, in racing terms, or are you a cautious play it safe?
Depends where. If you're on pole position, no, you don't gamble. But I think every time you're out of position, you've got to gamble, in my opinion. I think if you're Mercedes in this situation, who clearly have quite a bit of pace in the dry, actually, they need to make a gamble, and they need to do something to roll the dice to get them into contention for tomorrow, because there's no point in them driving around at 13th, 14th for the whole race today, because they'll achieve nothing.
3:30, so in just over 3 hours' time, we'll be with you for the sprint. Sergio Perez 3/10 down on Russell's time after the middle sector, so this is looking like a reasonable lap actually on the medium tyres. He might be able to do a sub 1 minute 20. He's on a brand new set of the medium tyres. Here he comes now out across the line. He does do a 1 minute 19.595. So I mean, that's actually quicker than Leclerc's time on the soft tyre. So if we theoretically are both doing a sprint race run, then that's quite an interesting direct comparison. But so much of this is just really trying to sort of guess something based on not very much information. But it's all you can do. It's all you can do. Carlos Sainz out on a medium tyre now. He's been going around for 5 or 6 laps now, Carlos Sainz. A 1 minute 20.3 is his best. His last was a 21.1, and he is getting a bit of traffic on this lap too. So not rapid pace from Sainz, but he feels like a soft no-brainer.
Definitely, he's got to make up ground. And to be honest, again, with the pace advantage they have, like Perez, as Andrew mentioned, it's not like the Alpines last year where they were kind of in the mid-pack. They have a pace advantage, so combine that with the additional performance they can have at the beginning of the race. If they have to hang on at the end, it's not going to be as big of a drama, I think.
Perez improving again on his second run on these medium tyres, or second lap I should say, on these medium tyres, his 4th lap on them overall, and he gets within a 10th of Russell's best lap time, so a 1 minute 19.538 for Sergio Perez, so he finds a little bit more time on that second run. Verstappen, meanwhile, is 13 laps into his run. So these Perez laps are quite impressive, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm just keeping an eye on Leclerc because he's on the soft. I'm wanting to see whether he's getting degradation or not, because he started in the high 19s, then he dropped off to a 20.6 on the last lap, and he's just coming around the final sector, 3 mini sectors to go now. He's got some purple mini sectors in there. Purple is fastest of all. So, yeah, you see that's a 21.860, but of course we don't know whether he's had some traffic in the middle of the lap.
Yeah.
But the indication, I don't want to prejudge because we need to see him do more laps, but if that is drop off, then he's going to have to go on the medium for the sprint. I think he can't afford to have a second drop off after 5 or 6 laps on the soft tyre if that's what he's going to have. But I say that, and here he is in the first sector of his next lap, and he's just done the fastest sector of all. So maybe I think it was traffic, probably.
Andy Sutcliffe. Maybe we're counting Andy Sutcliffe. 1977 failed to pre-qualify for the British Grand Prix.
I don't think you're a Grand Prix driver if you fail to pre-qualify for one race, are you?
I think I've failed to pre-qualify, like technically. Less than 9 minutes to go. Leclerc improving as he comes through the middle sector now. I don't think Ricciardo and Bottas are going to get any running in this session. Norris doesn't look like he's going to be getting out.
He had his helmet on, so I don't know if that's anything to get excited about given the state of the car, but he's certainly ready. So he's been given a nod that they might be able to get something in the last 8 minutes of the session.
And that's better than nothing, I presume, for him.
Definitely. I imagine your first, obviously you get the laps to the grid, but otherwise your first proper push lap in the dry conditions this weekend is going to be in the sprint race and starting third. So, I mean, the Formula One drivers, they're perfectly able to adapt, but for anyone that's a big task.
So that's a 1 minute 19.9 for Charles Leclerc as he comes across the line again. So that suggests that previous lap involved some kind of traffic, and that is slightly slower than Sergio Perez on the Red Bull. And actually Perez's lap times are still pretty strong on the mediums. Another 19.5 on that last lap, pretty much matching his best. So he's 5 laps into his medium run, and the lap times are sticking there. Fernando Alonso has just gone very quickly through the Tamburello chicane. Might have had a bit of a slipstream on his way down into the long straight, but yeah, interesting lap times between Perez and Leclerc at the moment. Verstappen, meanwhile, is still running on the mediums in the mid 1 minute 20s, which is interesting that he's on the same tyre as Perez. No, it is a lot older, actually, isn't it? Verstappen's tyre. He's been going for 15 laps, but still he's quite a bit closer to Perez than you might have expected in terms of lap time if he were fully fueled up for the start of the Grand Prix.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The teams will have all sorts of graphs. I've seen what they do. They have these sort of line graphs that map out the lap times one by one, and you can see very easily what's an outlier, how each stint goes, and that makes it a lot easier to make the decisions, whereas we're just sort of sticking our fingers in the air and going, that 19.6 for Leclerc after 8 laps, is that enough to go for the top?
I was just about to say, the data that they have will definitely put them in a position to make a much easier decision than it's us if we had to make the decisions out here. So they'll know after the end of this session what the favourable tyre choice is, and I think that will vary between particularly the top 2 teams with the 2 drivers. I think I would anticipate what Verstappen and Leclerc do will be different to what Sainz and Perez do, but yeah, I think they'll know exactly what the right choice is. Yeah,
I mean, if I was Sainz or Perez, I'd go for the soft, but because they're quick enough to not for it not to be a problem, and you bank the early grip, don't you? But for Verstappen and Leclerc, it's a much more complicated decision.
How remarkable did you find the amount of data when you first sort of got into Formula? Was it because it's just a completely different world, even from F2, F3 level?
Oh, it's so overwhelming. It's in a positive way, but it's amazing. We've got a replay of Mick Schumacher, who I think is going to go straight on at the chicane.
Gets on the brakes, turns it in.
No.
I think we're just seeing him attack the
curbs
pretty heavily. All 4 wheels coming off at the first right-hander.
Only when you see those slow motion replays you realise how big those curves are.
Yeah.
When they're at full speed, it just looks like they pop over them. But yeah, it's incredible. They have so many different engineers in different departments that in a debrief, as an example, you have everyone goes to, each kind of head of each department, I guess, and they say their piece. And for a driver, it's how much of that information do you need and how much do you process and choose to sort of just focus on the performance side. But like I said, there are so many engineers and different people crunching numbers for the tiniest little bits of the car. So yeah, it's unbelievable when you actually see it in first person.
Bethany and Eleonora both think that the one-name driver is Gecki, a mid-1960s F1 racer who apparently finished 9th in the 1966 Italian Grand Prix. I've never heard of them, I must say. Have you ever, Andrew?
That is so niche, isn't it?
I know, like you've
really
stumped
is.
Andrew Benson here, so that is something. I'm going to have a little look at.
Someone will have heard of him, like Mark Hughes or Paul Fernley. But
it was a pseudonym of Giacomo Russo.
You see, that doesn't count as one.
He was
name.
a racing driver from Italy. Why does? Oh, you're furious.
I'm not furious. I'm just making the point that that's not one name, is it?
3 Italian Grand Prix. Amazing. I don't know why was he? Why did he? It doesn't say why he had a pseudonym. So yeah, and unfortunately killed in a Formula 3 race at Caserta in 1967. Charles Leclerc has just had a big old slide coming through the chicane.
An example of just a bit too much curb. It's one of those you almost need to take more of it than you anticipate, because if you just nibble a little bit of it, it launches you into this sort of awkward, clumsy jump that then for the second part of the chicane makes it quite difficult. So yeah, he held that quite nicely, but definitely not what he wants to be doing in the sprint race later today.
3 minutes to go. Perez just does another 1 minute 19.6, fractionally slower than his previous best lap time. Leclerc is now on a 1 minute 20.3 in the Ferrari on the soft tyres.
This is interesting. The car performance rankings, I assume this is the AWS performance rankings, have put both Williamses as the fastest in the straight. So given they've got a Merc in the back of that must be quite a low downforce setup they've gone for, but it seems to be working for them in the dry, because Alex is up there in P11, Nicky a bit further back, but still faster than I think I would expect them to be.
Yeah.
And I guess that underlines what Mercedes have basically been saying about their engine. Everyone's looked at the performance so far this year and seen that the Mercedes engine cars are sort of less competitive than you'd expect them to be and slow on the straights, and assume that means that the Mercedes engine is rubbish or not as good as the others. But Mercedes is saying, look, if there is a difference between the engines, it's maybe a tenth or so. It's all to do with drag, and it just happens to be that those, it's. I mean, they haven't said it in so many words, but the bottom line is it just so happens that the Mercedes engine teams have not had particularly great starts to the season, and maybe their cars have got high drag as well, or at least we're running in high drag trim at some of those races, higher drag trim. And you can see that difference between the front-running cars too. There were a couple of races where the Ferrari was running more downforce than the Red Bull. Verstappen won in Saudi Arabia because of that, actually, in the end. But that didn't mean that the Honda engine was better than the Ferrari engine. It just meant that the Ferrari was running with more drag. And this was the problem McLaren had through the early Honda era, for example. They thought that it was all to do with the engine, and a lot of it was because they were running the car with too much drag.
Conversely, in 2020, after the FIA clamped down on Ferrari's engine dodginess, whatever we want to describe it as, and suddenly you had Haas, Alfa Romeo and Ferrari at the back of the grid in Monza, that probably was
definitely was the engine, yes.
Yeah. 45 seconds left on the clock. Rob Colley says that he used his name to hide his racing from his family, which was quite a common thing actually in the olden days.
Nelson Piquet did that.
Really?
His real name's Nelson Sotomayor. Piquet's his mother's maiden name, but he didn't want his family. He was a tennis player. He didn't want his family to know that he was going to be trying to be a racing driver, so he called himself Piquet.
Amazing.
Jack Nicholls isn't my real name. I just want my parents to know that
Your stage name.
Yeah, exactly, that I've taken this choice as a career. They wanted me to be a teacher. I don't know if they did want me to be a teacher. Now they're gonna text me now being like, no, we know we wanted you to do whatever you wanted to be. Thank you to my parents. It's got weird. 4 seconds left on the clock, thankfully, and George Russell is going to end this second practice session fastest, a 1 minute 19.457. But, and now I'll give you the full order. Perez second, Leclerc third, Hamilton fourth, fifth for Fernando Alonso, Sainz, Verstappen, Tsunoda, Gasly and Zhou, the top 10. Then it's Albon, Magnussen, Schumacher, Stroll, Vettel, the top 15. Ocon in 16th place, Nicholas Latifi in 17th place, and no meaningful running for either of the McLarens. Now Norris is getting an outlap in, so he's left the pits and he's doing an outlap, comes through Acqua Minerale, keeps it the right way, and he's absolutely pushing as he tries to get past Lewis Hamilton, and Hamilton's probably thinking, well, checker flag's out, everyone's going to be chilled. But this is just Norris's one chance to get a bit of track time today.
And that's so much better than nothing.
Yeah.
It seems insignificant, but yeah, just for Lando's peace of mind, if nothing else.
Well,
he's
that's
got
the
a
other
feel
thing.
for the conditions.
Yeah, and just to check, the brakes now work.
Exactly, brakes work, systems checks, all of the above. He's starting P3 later, I keep saying it, but yeah, just for his peace of mind, that's so important, I think.
So Norris across the line, then he does get a couple of laps in, but no running for Daniel Ricciardo, no running for Valtteri Bottas. Ricciardo is going to be starting 6th on the grid, so that's going to be tricky for him with no dry running at all this weekend as well. Bottas will be starting 8th on the grid, so that mid-pack is going to be very interesting indeed. Still a lot of work going on the back of Ricciardo's car, and that is the end of the session. So some very interesting lessons and looks in that, but do we have any kind of conclusion, Andrew Benson, would you say?
No. I think what it's underlined is it might be quite a tricky decision for Russell, sorry, not Russell, you're seeing his name at the top of the times there, for Verstappen and Leclerc as to what tyre they go on, because I think unless they crash together at the first corner, which is possible, but they'll be trying to avoid it, obviously, because of the jeopardy involved for the Grand Prix, because obviously if you crash out of the sprint race, then you start the Grand Prix at the back. There's still a lot of honour involved and 1 point difference, so they're going to both wanting to win the race so they can start the Grand Prix on pole. And I think the decision between soft and medium, at least from what we can see without the extra data of the teams, looks quite close for them. Beyond that, I think what Mercedes have underlined with Russell in first and Hamilton fourth is that their 11th and 13th places on the grid were not representative of their actual competitive position, which we always thought was the case anyway. They were struggling with tyre temperatures yesterday in qualifying, so they'll be trying. They look like they should be able to come through in the sprint race, but with the caveat that they're struggling for straight line speed. Tricky one to read as always this session, I think.
Jago wasn't even talking about Gecki. She was talking about G-Max, which was a pseudonym of Carlo Franchi, who entered one Formula One race with Surtees in 1978 but failed to qualify. So I don't think he counts as a Formula One driver, but another pseudonym. Passed away at the start of last year, aged 83. There we go. Also raced in the European Sports Car Championship. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. As Andrew says, Jamie Chadwick, quite difficult to know what we're going to see this afternoon, but I think we're going to see some movement in the field.
A little bit. I mean, as we touched on earlier, I think for the teams it's going to be a bit clearer than what we've tried to analyse in terms of the tyre choice. Quite cool. Leclerc obviously waving to the Italian fans out there. From my side, I think Russell's P1 is a little bit unrealistic, given it was sort of a one lap effort on the soft tyre, but the rest of the order, I think, is not too far away from what we will expect. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, now what they do with the tyre choices, with the data that they've gathered. But, yeah, there's definitely a few cars out of position for the sprint race.
Well, the sprint race gets underway at 3:30. We will be on air at 3:25. That's UK time. 3 hours from now, basically. And we will see who will take the first sprint victory of the season. It will be Verstappen versus Leclerc On the front row of the grid, tyre choice is going to be crucial. They're going to be battling it out for pole position for tomorrow's Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. As I say, we'll be back for the sprint race in 3 hours' time. 3:25. See you then.